Hello everyone, I'm DonTheCrown, and today I want to talk about Diablo 4's most ridiculous damage multiplier. And when I say it's ridiculous, right now this is giving me 5 times more damage for my character when it's active. And you might have guessed already, it's vulnerable. Vulnerable is something that every single class has access to in some way somehow, and what it does baseline is it increases the damage that enemies take by 20%, and I have 519.1% vulnerable damage bonus, and so that just makes it so that if an enemy is vulnerable, they're taking about 5.2% or 5.2 times more damage from me, which is just absolutely stupid. I don't know why this is a thing. It is really ridiculous. And if you need to see this numbers wise, I'm just going to auto attack here with lunging strike. I have an effect that applies vulnerable the first time I hit an enemy. So we can see I hit for a little bit and then we hit for 11,000. We hit for 2.6k. We hit for much higher than that. 2.6k, 13k. And you can just see the damage just goes through the roof as we hit with vulnerable. Very big difference in terms of the damage. And yeah, if you're not taking advantage of vulnerable in your build, then you're probably making a very, very large mistake, and adding this will help you absolutely shred. Now, if you are playing any class besides Necromancer and Sorcerer, one of the first glyphs that you want to activate is the one that is called Exploit, I believe. And this will give you basically the ability to, when an enemy is damaged by you, they become vulnerable for 3 seconds. Necromancer and Sorcerer actually have a different glyph that doesn't have this application thing, which I think is very big oversight by Blizzard, and they should probably adjust it so that everybody has application on their first hit with vulnerable if they want this to be a thing. Because right now, if you're not playing Bone Spear or Frost Nova, it's kind of hard for those classes to get vulnerable into their build. And just adding vulnerable in any way, shape, or form is just absolutely massive. I know for myself personally, Whirlwind Barbarians kind of have a little bit of a single target DPS issue. I know a lot of people like to pack Wrath of the Berserker. It gives you unstoppable, makes you feel really, really strong. But personally, I've been using Kick lately. And I'm not talking about the streaming service. I'm just talking about Kick the skill here, because just with 2 points into it, it applies vulnerable for 4 seconds. Now, it does have the downside of if you kick something, it tends to go super freaking far away, but bosses aren't moved by that, right? And if I had spent one more point in here, so this one here, it makes it so that when enemies are collided, it applies vulnerable to everything that is hit here, due to the fact that I am exploiting or using the exploit glyph. It's not actually an exploit. Although it'll make you feel like you are exploiting with the amount of damage you do. I'm personally just using Kick right now for bosses and for like testing in higher level nightmare dungeons, because like applying a stun is very, very strong for me. And also just applying that vulnerable is just absolutely game changing. My single target damage just has gone through the roof now that I can consistently and know exactly when I'm putting vulnerable on the target. There's a lot of different ways for barbs to apply vulnerable, like pressure point, for example, is pretty popular. And when I first saw pressure point, I was like, this is terrible. This is a waste of 3 points. Nobody would ever use it. Now pressure point is like hands down guaranteed in my build, because vulnerable is just that strong. It just increases my damage by 5 times. There's no reason not to take it. You basically need to have it. If you're playing in a party, you always want somebody who can apply vulnerable. Bone Necromancers are pretty good at this. Rogues can be pretty good at this as well. But vulnerable is just absolutely a game-changing mechanic. And I kind of hope that Blizzard does something about this to kind of tone it down a little bit, either to make it so it's more accessible to everybody. Like, I feel like I really have to do a lot of shenanigans to kind of make vulnerable work on my Barbarian right now, or to make it so it's not so overwhelmingly powerful. Like, I think anything that's even like doubling your damage during a conditional is quite strong, and increasing it by 5 freaking times is probably a little too much. Right now you can get vulnerable damage on weapons, for example, and rings. And barbarians can, on a two-hander, you're getting 70.5% maximum vulnerable damage. And barbarians, of course, get two two-handers, two one-handers. So that is quite a bit of damage. Rogues also have crossbows, which have an implicit for vulnerable damage, which is insane. And so you're just kind of in a really, really good spot. Rings themselves can go up to 35.3% vulnerable damage. As you can see, I just kind of have vulnerable damage and crit strike damage like everywhere I possibly can, because right now it's just that freaking strong. So if you're not already incorporating vulnerability into your build some way, somehow, highly recommend that you go check it out and try it out. I think that your clearing speed will drastically improve, and hopefully this helps. If you have any questions about vulnerable or anything else, feel free to drop a question in the comments below. One last thing though, you might be wondering, okay, Don, so you have 519% vulnerable damage here right now. And I, could potentially get another like 6% here on a ring with a perfect roll. How much more damage would that really give you? Well, I just put out a tool here in my most recent video that allows me to compare and contrast different items. I've gone through and filled out my character sheet here with all of the stats of my character, and I can just go and be like, hey, how much more damage would I get if they perfect rolled a vulnerability damage ring? And you can see that it's almost 1% more damage. Now, if you're not really a big ARPG fan, or like someone who's like really crunched numbers in a game before, 1% damage might sound very small. However, it's the type of thing that kind of like adds up and multiplies. You get like 1% over here, 5% over here, another 5% over here, and next thing you know, you're like one-shotting bosses. And yeah, so vulnerable damage is ludicrous, and this is 1%, even if I already have an insane amount of vulnerable damage. If instead my vulnerable damage was very low, that 6% becomes a 2% multiplier, and it's pretty easy to get like on rings. If I didn't have it on a ring in the first place, it would be 10% more damage in this low vulnerable damage situation, which is really big damage. So go out, add vulnerable to your build, check out that vulnerable glyph, and get vulnerable damage on your gear. It's really going to help you out quite a bit, and it helps you be able to use these emerald gems if you're playing a crit build, which gives you critical strike damage versus vulnerable enemies. Guess what? The second best stat is actually critical strike damage if you're playing a crit build, and main stat is probably like right on par if your crit chance is not very high. So yeah, it just works so well together. Hopefully this helps your entire gameplay just be better, and we'll see you soon.